Hello there. It's so very nice to see you again. Oh yes, we have met before, many times in fact. Perhaps you do not remember? That is all right. If you are here, it is because you are meant to be here. All I ask is that you spend a little time with me. Please sit, have some tea, and let me tell you a story. That's why you came up here, isn't it? You want a story, and I have many of them. Today's story is about an ancient goddess who wanders the countryside during the week of Epiphany. Perhaps because she longs for the company of her children, the descendants of those who once worshipped her as a divine mother. She goes by many names: Frau Hol, Frau Hulda, Old Mother Frost, the Spinning Lady. But for today's story, she is known simply as Berchta.
This episode of That Thing in the Attic is brought to you by A Passion for Folklore. It is the first of a series of spine-tingling Christmas horror classics. Oh yes, if you enjoy stories of creepy folklore, weird media, and strange cults, which may or may not be true, please give this video a like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss a single upload. Always remember that thing in the attic, and never leave it alone for too long.
Imagine winter of pre-modern times in the Alpine and Scandinavian regions of Europe. The wilderness is desolate and silent, beautiful and terrifying. The white snow only deepening the shadows between the massive trees that surround your home. Your village just had a successful harvest this year. Your family will eat well and survive until spring. Perhaps you live in a Middle German house around the 17th century. All the animals have been shut away for the season in the floor below your living quarters. The heat from their bodies and their waste help to keep the house warm. The smell is preferable to freezing to death. And tonight, the smell of below cannot penetrate the delicious scent of potato dumplings and smoked herring, and you are especially looking forward to the traditional king cake your mother bakes every year. You are a good child. You live with your parents, your grandmother, your siblings, and your father's younger brother and his family. Cramped is not the word you would use to describe your home where so many people live. It's certainly not ideal, but it is cozy. The men and the older boys help chop firewood, while the women and older girls prepare tonight's dinner. The little ones, only concerned with growing up, play with wooden toys of knights and animals, all carved with loving detail by your late grandfather. Oma sits by the cockle stove, weaving yet another blanket to keep your family warm. The wind whistles against the windows, and the snow flurries like a swarm of giant white bees beyond the glass. You are not concerned with this. It is a winter night like any other, and the warmth of the fire and the love of your family keep the cold away. Cows moo sleepily beneath your feet, and your mother and aunt discuss the latest village gossip, and children laugh at something silly your oldest brother does. You are relieved to see that your mother finally looks relaxed. She had been in a fury all day, making sure the house is extra clean, not even the slightest speck of dust allowed to flourish. She had been especially adamant that any weaving projects must be finished. All the distaffs must be clean. It is not anything new. Every year on the eve of Epiphany, she is almost insane with determination to make your house as clean as possible, preparing the house to be blessed by the bishop. But the bishop didn't come today. The weather had been particularly brutal. You and the other children took it upon yourselves to chalk the blessing along the doorway of the house. It is not the same as a church blessing, but the intention is there. When you showed your mother, she smiled bright and hugged you, and you did not miss the relief in her eyes. She clearly had been worried that the house would not be blessed this year. Now she laughs at something your father says. Her jolly demeanor returned, and your chest swells with happiness. A knock on the door plunges the house into silence. The fire continues to crackle and spark, but its light feels muted. The adults have all gone completely still. The children, not understanding, do so as well. The dogs who have been napping now snap awake and begin to howl and growl, fur standing on end, fangs viciously bared like wolves as they glare at the stairway leading to the door below. Who would be out there in this darkness and bitter cold? You glance at the brass cross that hangs above the kitchen stove, the figure of Christ as calm as ever as he hangs there, a sacrifice for the good of mankind made over 1,000 years ago. The knock echoes a time even more ancient than that. You know it as surely as you know the land you were born into, the land your father and his father and all his fathers before have been born into. Berchta. Oma only whispers, but the word rings like a church bell in the silence. One of the little ones scrambles to grasp the skirts of his older sister, and she touches his shoulder with gentle reassurance. No. Your mother responds with such certainty that you don't even consider how she could possibly know who is at the door. Perhaps it is the bishop, finally come to bless the house for Epiphany. Worry begins to tickle at your stomach as your father stands to his feet. But in a sudden display of assertiveness, your gentle mother stops him with her hand. I go, she says. I am the lady of the house. You trail after your mother before you even realize what you are doing. She does not complain, but gives you a stern look that tells you to keep out of the way. Your oldest brother tags along as well. He is of nearly Marian age, and has taken it upon himself to be a protector of the house as your father grows older. The open door reveals the swirling snow and a hunched figure covered in dark rags. A hood shadows the face in a darkness deeper than woods, except for the long, bird-like nose emerging from beneath 2 shiny pinpricks of light where the eyes would be. Its breath is slow, heavy, bestial, not the kind of sound a normal person, any person, could make. The voice is that of an old woman, but nothing like the soft-spoken tenderness of Oma. Her vocal cords scrape against her throat as if frozen, as if winter itself was trying to speak. A chill shoots up your spine. You are revolted by the sight of her, but you don't want to be rude. If anything, not to embarrass your mother in front of this unexpected guest. Trying to distract yourself from the stranger's shadowed face, you notice her staff, a bundle of dry twigs tied together in the shape of, not a broom, but more like a distaff, as if she had arrived to help with the weaving. Welcome, your mother greets. Please, come in and make yourself warm by the fire. You must be cold from having traveled all this way. For a moment, the stranger doesn't speak. Her free hand touches the doorframe. Her nails are long, black, and curled, more like the talons of a bird of prey than the withered hands of your beloved grandmother. The talons trace along the chalk of your crude house blessing, and you feel a sense of sacrilege. The horses shudder in the stables, hooves stomping the floor, quivering and nervous. You quickly move aside as your mother leads the old lady up to the living floor. You look at your brother, but he seems just as confused and worried as you are, and simply gestures for the two of you to head back. The family all stare in surprise and a kind of terrified wonder when the old woman enters. The dog's growls dissolve into soft whining, and they flee to the safety of the bedrooms, tails tucked close. The stranger holds up a gnarled hand, the one not holding the birch distaff.
Do not mind me, dears. All I ask is to join your company on such a holy
Something about this feels familiar, like a story you heard a long time ago, before the bishop warned that listening to such stories strayed your soul from the path of God. But your head feels foggy, as if the snowy white bees from outside are now swarming behind your eyes. Despite insisting that the family goes about its business as always, it's nearly impossible for you to keep your gaze from wandering over to the old woman. The bottom of her tall birch distaff makes a heavy, hollow thud with each step she makes. The floorboards creak and groan beneath her, as if the floor can barely hold her weight despite her fragile size. Her long talons brush along the tops of cupboards and railings and trace the carvings within the beams. You don't like that especially. Those are illustrations born from the dreams and memories of your family, telling its story since before you were born for all to see. This old woman's touch feels defiling. She pays particular attention to the cabinets where all the fibers are stored by the cockle stove. She carefully counts each spool of thread, tests the sharpness of each distaff, and meticulously inspects each finished woven work, as if searching for any sign of poor quality. The old woman stops at Oma's feet, gazing at the unfinished blanket on her lap. You want to run to her to protect her, but your mother tells you to go wash up for supper. Ancient talons lift Oma's blanket with a gentleness that you did not expect. That blanket, beautifully detailed, each fiber stitched with love, hangs from those talons in its pitifully unfinished state. The old woman considers for a moment before she tenderly places the blanket back on Oma's lap.
Old hands cannot help but idle. I'm sure it'll be a lovely and cherished gift when it is finally finished, even though its final stitch will also be your last.
Oma nods, and the firelight reflects the unshed tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispers with a reverence you have only ever heard in her prayers. This scene will haunt you for the rest of your life, and you will dream it the night before your Oma dies that following spring, waking up to her death from beneath the blanket that she had just finished weaving for you.
And what delicious do we have for this holy night?
As you help set the table, your mother tells the old woman of the meal she and your aunt have created. It is a simple meal, but delicious. Potato dumplings and smoked herring, and king cake stuffed with sweet jam for dessert. There is plenty, even a sizable portion for any unexpected visitors. The old woman's eyes gleam as she listens, and with each word you notice the slit of a grin growing. "Who are you?" It is your brother who voices what you so long to ask. Your mother's head snaps toward the two of you, the glare in her eyes chilling you to the core with its ferocity. The old woman chuckles like the rumble of distant thunder. She approaches your brother. The pair of tiny lights gleam much too brightly from the shadow of her face, and her grin stretches like pulling skin from a carcass. When she speaks, her voice is almost playful.
That curiosity will carry you far, child. Never lose it. As for who I am, you know who I am. Even if you do not realize it. Now, answer me this. What have you eaten today?
What? Answer her. Your mother looks all but frantic. Well, I had oatmeal this morning, some nuts and raisins, and I guess I'm about to eat the dumplings and herring for supper? Then the old woman cups your brother's chin in her hand. Her talons dig a little into his face, and for a moment she looks infinitely larger than he is. She squeezes his face, which forces his mouth open wide, impossibly wide, and peers inside. Surprisingly, your brother does not resist her. In fact, no one in the family moves to help him. Why? Why is this old woman who came into your house from the dark winter night allowed to do whatever she wants? She releases him with a nod.
Curious and truthful. A long life awaits you indeed.
Then she moves on to the next child, and the next, taking their faces one by one in her bird-clawed hand, forcing open their mouths, and asking one simple question as she peers down each throat.
What have you eaten today?
Finally, it is your turn. You are determined to resist her, to let her know that you are only polite for the sake of your mother, but you, yourself, do not welcome her in your house.
Such spirit. The warrior's instinct has yet to be lost to time.
Before you can figure out if what she means is a compliment, she suddenly grabs your face. Any idea, any thought of resistance is immediately destroyed. Despite her mangled hand, more bone than flesh, despite the talons of her fingers digging into your cheeks and forcing your mouth open, her touch is warm and achingly familiar. More than the embrace of your mother, it is as if you have actually returned to her womb, cradled and connected, safe, beloved. Her question is as gentle as sunlight and birdsong, a summer breeze brushing over morning glories. And there is a sadness, too, like the sorrow of a parent watching their child moving on to adulthood. What have you eaten today, my child? You answer, oatmeal, raisins, milk, dumplings and herring. The old woman steps back with a nod, and that warm feeling fades away. You start to shake a little, trying to hold back tears. Not afraid or apprehensive, just sad. The tiny children cry softly, seeking comfort from their older siblings and cousins. The old woman ignores them as she directs her question to the adults of the house. Oatmeal, milk, dumplings, smoked herring, the same answer as all the ones before. Sausage. The word itself shatters like glass. Your uncle is the one who utters it, his face dark with shame. Fritz, what? Your father gasps. After delivering firewood to the Johanna family, your uncle says quickly, his voice strangely high-pitched with panic. His wife gave me a basket of sausage to share. It is in the cellar now. I was going to tell you about it after Epiphany. It smelled so delicious, and we've had nothing but fish these 12 days. I couldn't resist. It was just a small bite, nothing more. The cross falls from the wall to bounce off the stove and slam to the floor. The eyes of Christ peer at the ceiling, and you could have sworn that gaze was twisted with accusation. The old woman's face is a nasty, contorted scowl of rage. I meant no offense! She doesn't care for his words. Her arm rears back and she slashes at your uncle's gut. Only that hand which held nothing now wields a knife, the same kind used to behead the chicken squawking wildly from the floor below. Your uncle drops to his knees, holding his darkening stomach. The children scream, and your father yells for the older ones to bring everyone to their bedrooms. You are glued in place. You can't look away. Blood, bright red blood, pours from your uncle's body in shocking amounts. You have seen butcherings before, and participated yourself. You are no stranger to blood and viscera, but those have all been animals slaughtered for meat and leather, not another human being. Your uncle doesn't even scream. It's as if he still doesn't realize what is happening. His wife, your aunt, falls to her knees, sobbing, begging the old woman to stop as she clutches her head. Go with the children! Go with the children! Your father yells over and over, but you're not sure if he's talking to you or to her, or maybe just to no one in particular. The old woman leans over your uncle as she slides her bloodied knife back into her skirts. Then she reaches down into the gap in his gut, and, like a traveler searching for something important buried somewhere in their luggage, she starts tossing out fleshy, blood-soaked blobs carelessly from the cavity in your uncle's body and onto the dark red floor. The stench alone makes you dizzy with nausea and your eyes water. Your uncle's entrails squirm and spasm next to his body as if they were alive. His screams fade into moans of agony. Someone is trying to yank you to the room. Maybe your mother or sister. Someone. The old woman lifts her talons out of your uncle's body, her hand dripping with viscera, as she holds up an object as if in triumph. A sausage. Just a small bite of sausage. But that's not even the worst of it. Oh no. Whoever is pulling you has stopped, and everything has gone still, except for the snap, snap, snapping of the woman's Berchta staff. She breaks off the twigs and begins stuffing them in your uncle's body as his guts quiver at her feet. To the brim, she stuffs the pulpy cavity with pieces of her distaff as if he were a scarecrow. She hums as she does so, cheerful and haunting, an ancient song, one that you've never heard before, and yet you know its melody. Then she produces a massive needle from her skirts, hooks a thick fiber through its eye, and starts to sew your uncle back together. He moans as the sharp point penetrates his flesh, still very much alive. As if snapping out of a trance, you glance wildly at your parents, your oldest brother, your aunts, all who stand there frozen with horror. And Oma watches it all with unmoving silence as her own son is mutilated before her eyes. Perhaps that is the biggest shock to you of all. This is the same woman who nearly cries over your scraped knees and bruised forehead, simply from childish foolishness. But now, there is a coldness in her eyes, the same kind of look your mother has whenever she disciplines you or one of your siblings. You've heard from your father that Oma, who is nothing but sweet to her grandchildren, had once been a very strict mother, and you've never really believed that until now. The old woman takes a rusty pair of shears and snaps off the fiber. That's when the blood finally stops flowing, and your uncle stops moving. And, as if nothing happened, the old woman turns to your shaking mother.
Alas, the time has come to depart. You have a lovely house. Your hospitality is most appreciated.
Such is a tale of Berchta. Not much is known of her origin, though there are a few theories, one of which being that she is actually an ancient Germanic goddess fallen from divinity after her believers converted to Christianity. But she still wanders the region, perhaps to remind the descendants of her believers that she is still very much around and very much in power. Poor Uncle Fritz. What happened to him? Well, I can leave that up to you to decide. Maybe, just maybe, the next morning you wake up to find all the gore and bloodstains utterly cleaned up as if they had never been there. You see your uncle sitting at breakfast, looking a bit paler than normal, as if he hadn't slept at all the night before. He tries to brush it off, but his eyes have a hollow look to them. He seems to have difficulty going to the bathroom for the next few days, but he improves. They say Berchta, as terrifying as she can be, doesn't actually take your guts, but simply teaches you a very traumatizing lesson about the consequences of making poor decisions due to your human vices. Or maybe it was all literal, and he did die, his guts torn out of his body by an ancient goddess as she removes a piece of offending sausage from his stomach and then has his empty belly stuffed with birch twigs. In a way, that's still a happy ending, right? After all, he would be extremely fortunate that Berchta didn't take her wrath out on the rest of the family. Regardless, a lesson is learned here. Not a lesson of indulgence or breaking promises or whatever. Oh no. A much, much more important lesson. That the old gods have not forgotten their children, even if their children have forgotten them. They walk among us, not to punish or cast judgment, but simply to remind. Interesting to think about, is it not? I thank you for spending time with me and listening to this tale. I have many others to share, should our paths happen to cross again. But for now, the tea has gone cold, and I must rest.